Hello there. If Liz Truss does do this, then Nicola Sturgeon, Salmond and the entire Scots Nats campaign will be incandescent with rage. It would be worth it just to see the look on Ian Blackford's face as this indie-wrecking law was pushed through Parliament right under his nose. Because according to reports, Liz Truss is mulling over whether to get a referendum bill through Parliament that would, if enacted, require more than 50% of all voters in Scotland to opt for Scottish independence to make it happen. It would no longer be 50% plus one of all votes cast, the turnout. No, it would be 50% plus one vote of all registered voters in Scotland. So even if, on a turnout of 80%, 55% of those who voted said yes to independence and only 45% said no, then there'd be no independence, because only 44% of the whole electorate would have voted for independence. The bar of 50% of all voters choosing yes would not have been reached. So as you can see, this 50% plus one of the whole electorate is a high bar. Had the 2016 EU referendum been held on this basis, then we would still be fully tied to the Brussels lawmaking machine right now, as only 37.5% of the whole registered electorate voted to leave the EU. So if Liz Truss does do this, it will cause a lot of anger in Scotland, especially as those calling for such a referendum would need to show that for over a year at least 60% of the population wanted another referendum. But it could be argued that this is just acting on lessons learned from the past to make any future referendum outcome emphatically democratic. Now, it would be strange if this were to be an act isolating Scotland out for special treatment. That could be viewed as very undemocratic. So one supposes this new law might well encompass all referendums going forwards, like a rejoin the EU referendum perhaps. And would there be two classes of referendum, one requiring a simple majority and constitutional ones requiring a majority of the whole electorate? And a big question, would referendums held on this latter basis be binding on government as opposed to just advisory? Anyway, on the Brexit question, there is a huge difference between leaving the European Union after a couple of decades using a legal trigger, Article 50, and splitting 300 plus years of a hugely successful union when there is no such legal trigger. Now, the wording of any such new law would have to make it crystal clear that it is the side wanting change from the status quo that needs the 50% plus one of the total electorate. As an example, I'll point out that there was a referendum in 1975 on whether or not we remained in the common market after just 2 years of membership. A bit of a con if you ask me. But this was the question. Do you think that the United Kingdom should stay in the European community, the common market? And yes, won with only 43% of the total electorate at the time. And that 1975 referendum was brought by the government of the day to basically affirm support for our membership. But it didn't pass this 50% test. But that's in the past. While we should always be looking to the future and improving legislation. But I do own to being torn on this one. Yes, 50% plus one of the whole electorate as opposed to 50% plus one of the turnout does sound much more definitive. But the government can always rely on voter apathy on any subject to keep 20 to 30% of the electorate, at least, at home. So all you have to do is frame the question to suit. And at the end of the day, changing the law on referendums on this basis would ensure the status quo won out in almost all cases. There would be no point in having referendums on capital punishment or changing the country's green policies, for example. Or, as I've already pointed out, rejoining the EU. Because the status quo would always stick. So there is a big argument to keep the current system so as to encourage people to get involved and also to allow those who are politically active a chance to have their voice heard.